Oh, yeah. That's scummy. Yeah, it's just scumbag. Hey, how we doing today? I want to say, and I kind of mean it, it's good to see all of you. Speaking of that, I totally forgot to point something out. Because I was so, this map is just so incredible. And this word, I mean, I just can't get over this. I didn't even point out this picture. That is supposed to be a slave ship. And these are slaves, enslaved people brought over the Middle Passage. They got little suits. They just got a little family together like it's a little cruise. That's nothing at all like it was. It sounds like it looks like a pleasure cruise, how Negroes lived under slavery. It's mind-boggling, that revision of history. Speaking of revision of history, what was it called? What was it called where the South basically reinvented the reason for the Civil War? What was that called? Came up, it wasn't about slavery. What was that called? Yeah, the Lost Cause. And what became the symbol of the Lost Cause and states' rights and Jim Crow? The Confederate battle flag. And, oh, what were the laws that segregated the South again? Jim Crow laws. What is it called? Where it said you had to pass a literacy test? Yeah, grandfather squad. And, oh, and the Reconstruction myth. They said it was not about establishing equal rights and bringing the South back in the Union. It was really a what? Yeah, Northern invasion, Northern aggression. And what was the book and then movie that would become kind of personify this myth? There's two of them. Which movie led to the Klan?
Birth of the Nation.
Yeah, Birth of the Nation. Which movie would become kind of the myth of the beauty of I know it. I heard it. And because I was thinking Gone with the Wind. So I'll just answer. That's what I had in my head. That's why I changed it. And lastly, what did they start building all over the South to enforce Jim Crow and the Lost Cause? Yeah, monuments all over. All these monuments. And that's why monuments are going to become so controversial, because they were built for this lost cause. And so many teachers would be taught this. I still can't get over that's 2012. So did we get the sundown towns?
Yep.
All right. So let's move on then to the West. The West in the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age would be the term of the post-Civil War, and I'll explain how that happened. And when we think in the United States of the West, because of popular culture, books, radio shows, movies, and then the first television shows, the most popular ones were about the West. And the West is really this area in blue, those last states. The last areas that the United States would conquer from American Indians. And this area would also be called the Great Plains. And that area, kind of the green blob, is the plains. Okay, it's really hard to say what the plains are, per se, but we know what they are not. They're not areas where there are mountains, and there's not areas where it rains. Helena's kind of right in the middle of this, because we got mountains around us, but we are not in the mountains. Basically, right here is the rain line. Approximately there, every place west of that line, it rains less than 20 inches. So basically, it's an area where it's hard to grow a crop without irrigation. And your yields are low. And so that is the area that people going west on the Oregon Trail or whatever would get over as quick as possible and get to California. And therefore would be the last area conquered by the United States. So that would be the West, even though obviously it's much more complex than that. So the Plains Indians who lived there, the last remaining resistance to the expansion of the United States, by definition, are nomadic, because there's not enough rain to sit in one small place. They have to be small. They control their populations because they can't have too many people. Unlike the vast majority of tribes east of the rain line and also on the West Coast, they couldn't have permanent villages, cities, empires. They couldn't have crops. They weren't as agricultural. They might grow, the Plains Indians, for example, the Cheyenne would grow crops along like the Platte River, and then, or help cultivate in the spring, move into this area here, following the bison herds, and then come back and cultivate what was there in the fall. But they couldn't be in one spot. The only time a plains tribe would be in one spot in the winter. They would hunker down in one spot and wait it out. If winter's on the plains, pleasant. And so hunker down in one spot. And they would rely upon the bison. I say buffalo all the time. I can't help it. But buffalo are an Asiatic or African animal. Bison are the Americans. But if you say it, that's fine. But I really try to make myself say bison. And these are the bison. By 1850, because of partially hated by the ravages of disease to the tribes, there were between 50 and 60 million bison on the Great Plains. So these herds were huge. And they would, you can imagine, almost become wholly instrumental to these plains culture. In fact, the bison and plains Indians became synonymous. And then when the horse arrived with the Spanish in the 15 and 1600s, another way to look at it is the horse returned to the Americas. With the Spanish, these plains tribes took to the horse like you can't imagine. We already mentioned the Comanche, but also the Kiowa. And then we're getting closer to Montana, the mighty Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and then of course the Lakota Sioux. They took to the horse. They would become one with the horse, allow for more mobility, change hunting forever. And the diseases, remember the diseases that destroy over 90% of the population in the East, same thing in the West? They hammered the Plains Indians because there's not as many. They weren't permanent. It did not hit them to the same effect. So like, yeah, smallpox would devastate the Mandan tribe in the 1820s here, what's now North Dakota, and would devastate the Lakota and the Dakota Sioux here. It just didn't have the same effect. Let's be clear, it was still incredibly deadly, but not quite what it was in the East. So these Plains tribes were there, and that is a painting from the 1840s. These are Cheyenne, this is probably Kansas, hunting down all the bison, and the Oregon Trail would change everything. And it's not so much that they were coming into this land and staying in the plains, but they were going through the Oregon Trail to get to California, where disease and war would devastate the tribes here. And they would disrupt the bison herd, and there would be some attacks on the Oregon Trail, and that would lead directly to the Fort Laramie Treaty, the only U.S. fort in the northern Great Plains up until the 1860s was right here, Fort Laramie in Wyoming. No, it's not near Laramie, Wyoming. It's a national park now. But probably the biggest gathering of tribes in the Great Plains would happen for this treaty. And basically the deal was this. The tribes would keep their land in the plains, how they would fight it out however they would, but they would keep the land. Just let the migrants go through on the Oregon Trail. That was the agreement. And for about 13 years, the United States, this might shock you, kept the treaty. Remember the Northwest, Tippecanoe, Tecumseh, remember that? They broke all the treaties. Well, for the most part, they kind of kept it. And then what would change? It would start with mining. And that would be the first major incursion of the U.S. into the plains where they stay. And I know we're not, the mines aren't necessarily in the plains, but the transportation routes, but also to hunt for food, mining. Now, this is a survey level class in American history, so we have to cover a lot. We can't go into great detail. This is something unfortunate because Montana history has such a great connection to mining. The first boom towns would happen in Nevada and other places. There would be placer mining. There would be a significant number of Chinese immigrants, all men, would do this. And then hard rock mining, the actual tunneling. Here's a sluice in Montana for a hard rock mine. This is a hydraulic mine in Montana. These would all be used. But now you have miners. And the big thing is they would come in, these massive booms. Oh, these are all the gold mines in western Montana. This is a Google map done about 10 years ago. But I thought this was just fascinating. All those gold specks. That just gives you the idea of the extent of the gold mines. Most of them now are abandoned and doing what happens a lot with business in the United States. They're just leaking ruin and poison and arsenic into our water because they just left ruin. Have you been to Butte? That's the thing, abused. Okay, so gold and silver were the first mines. Remember, the United States still was backing their money, their specie with gold, or their currency with gold. There was a little break for 10 years in the Civil War with the greenbacks. Then went back. We're coming to what's called the gold standard. Silver was worth anywhere from 1/50th to 1/20th of gold, but this was a storage of value, of wealth. But wherever there's silver, there's copper and lead. Wherever there's silver. So, for example, they found a great strike of silver in Butte. Well, silver prices dropped like a rock in 1890. There was copper. And the second industrial revolution had just begun. Electricity, copper. I don't know why that fascinates me so much, but wherever there's silver, there's copper. You drive to Butte and look at some of the hills along the way, like near Basin and a few of those places. You look on the side of these ridges, and there's these big kind of gray splotches. That's silver and copper. It's pretty low grade ore, but it's all there. And Comstock lode in Nevada would be a massive strike in the early 1860s. The first really big one since California a decade earlier. And that's how enough people got to be in Nevada to make it a quick stay for Republicans in the 1864 election. But then Colorado would be the next big strike. And there's already a small little kind of an agricultural little town called Denver, and that would boom because it would be the commercial center. That's making Denver today. And then what state would have the next really big gold strike? I'm sorry, what territory? Well, first it was Dakota and or Nebraska territory, then Washington territory, then Montana territory. Montana, Bannock, Virginia City. Has anyone ever been to Bannock or Virginia City? Both of them? Bannock's really cool. Bannock's great. I would highly recommend it. It's really Bannock, is also the first territorial capital, then would be moved north, but Montana, all during the Civil War. And the point is, all these people who are going there need food. And it's basically it's very difficult to transport goods across the plains in wagons. So they got to send hunters out to kill the ones. And that is a major incursion onto American Indian land that is their land on the plains because of the Fort Laramie Treaty. And so this coincides at the exact same time as the Transcontinental Railroad. So the Transcontinental Railroad. And this, because Southern Democrats are gone, it passed, and it's massive government aid. Now, many of the people who did this really pushed this idea of laissez-faire, as we mentioned before. Hands off by government. But this is a great example of laissez-faire economics. Massive government aid for business, and then hands off on competition. And this is going to be the basis of trickle-down supply side or conservative economics today. Massive government aid for big business. And this is huge. Unprecedented aid. And Southern Democrats would have voted against it, but they were not the Union. They were in rebellion. So the first thing was no interest. Basically, free money in loans that would be given to the railroads per mile of track. So a loan and no interest is free money. Banks charge interest. This is just a gift. Free money. You don't have to pay interest. And pay it back when you want to. I mean, they would pay it back, kind of, but at a huge benefit. So any mile of track on plains, 16,000 miles. Foothills, 32,000 miles. Mountains, 48,000. And then later double. And it would double again. Boy, did they give money to the railroads. Free money. You borrow money, you pay for it with interest. This is free. And it's also telling everybody else, the companies we choose, the government will not let them fail. This is a massive subsidy. Now, what's a plains? What's a foothill? What's a mountain? Huh?
I think we have government special now, so I don't think
Do we really have one now? See, that's the point. Is a little hill, it's not a foothill? You double your money if it's a foothill. If you have a couple little hills, say, oh, that's a mountain. That's another $16,000 a mile. Wouldn't it be in the benefit of these companies to say that little hump is a mountain and get more money? Leland Stanford, the head of the Central Pacific Railroad that would come from Sacramento East, he found a compliant geologist to say the little foothills just east of Sacramento, mountains, and made Leland Stanford hundreds of thousands of dollars because he took this money from government loans and then, well, he had to be paid a salary, didn't he? So paid himself a big salary. Josiah Whitney was the name of that compliant geologist. And when Leland Stanford would buy himself, basically he bought and paid for the governorship of California, he named the tallest mountain in California, which is the tallest mountain in the entire continental United States, after that geologist. So Mount Whitney is the tallest mountain in the continental United States. So you make somebody a lot of money, you might get a mountain named after yourself. Nothing else. Lots of government aid. Get money from this. Stanford became a master of this. Oh, one more thing. Did you catch what I told you? The company got the loan. The company has to pay back the loan. But the people who work for it, including the president, Leland Stanford, they don't have to pay it back. They get paid salary. The company has to pay it back. Gee, I wonder if that could be an advantage for a new type of company called a corporation. We will get to that on Friday. So, also they got massive land grants. Now, it's a little more complex than what they show on this map. This is a Democratic Party ad attacking this huge giveaways to companies. But most of the land in this gray area right here was given to the Union Pacific Railroad, Central Pacific. Look at this huge hunk given to the Santa Fe Railroad, huge hunk to the Southern Pacific, to the Northern Pacific. The idea was, first off, land next to the railroad would be more valuable than land far away. So they got valuable land. They would take this land, the idea was, and then they would sell it and pay for the railroad. You're sitting on land that was given to the Northern Pacific Railroad because of the Transcontinental Railroad Act. It was later amended for 1872. You're sitting on land. Where was the Northern Pacific Railroad main line? It goes through Butte. That gives you an idea how far away that was. That's 100 miles away. And then you're sitting on land given to it. That gives you an idea of the extent of the land. I should add, that means the land is going to be taken from the people who live there and given to the truck or given to the companies. So these are what we call subsidies. And only certain companies get it. So you can imagine, this could be a big political issue. Companies will give political contributions, give politicians to make lots of money. Subsidies. And any company that gets the subsidy, that's telling everybody, investors, banks, you name it, that the government will not let this company fail. Does this happen today? All the time. The richest men in the United States made the bulk of their money through government subsidies. Taxpayer money gave them this. Jeff Bezos and Amazon got unprecedented money from the government. Basically, didn't have to pay sales tax. And therefore, they could undermine local businesses and become a monopoly. Yeah. Direct government aid. Elon Musk is all government. Everything he has is government. Subsidies for, he bought a company called Tesla, and they got massive government subsidies. He didn't know, he did not invent it. Bought it from somebody else. Huge government subsidies for space. He didn't pay for it. He gets huge amounts of government aid. Doesn't mean he doesn't work hard or smart or maybe lucky. It could be a number of things, but it's government. So these are the land grant words. It's not all of the land. It is in what I like to call a checkerboard pattern. I meant to write checkerboard, it came out this, and I've left it because I like it. So it's checkerboard. Every other section would be given to the railroad. So the land on both sides, it'd be railroad held on by the government, which they would sell later on. And remember, this is all land they're going to take away from the various tribes, Railroad government, railroad government. So if you look at this map here, all this land here, this is where the land grant was. So it's by definition, it's half of that land. Checkerboard pattern. So the first two transcontinental railroads, the first one, and this was done on purpose. A massive contract was given to the Central Pacific Railroad that would go from Sacramento east, and the Union Pacific Railroad that would go from Omaha west. So it's not a true transcontinental. They would connect two railroads that were already established in the east. And they would meet here in the middle. But the plan was a competition. They didn't pick a spot in the bill where they would meet. So the idea was they would go as fast as they could go, each direction, to get as many miles as they could to get all those no interest loans. And it would be a race. So it would be built faster and really shoddily, really shabby job they did. And so in fact, when they got to Utah, the grading crews that were smoothing and leveling the land for the railroads for the Central Pacific and Northern Pacific passed each other and kept going. Because they wanted to make every penny possible. So the new grant administration had to say, here, and pick a spot. Pick a spot. This is one of the most incredible technological feats in American history. And while this is going on, it went right through Plains land that was given to them by the Fort Laramie Treaty. So we're not even acting like now we're looking at the treaty. So that's Nebraska. Just to give you an idea of how much land was given. That's every other section of that area in green across Nebraska was given to the Union Pacific Railroad. I should add the Union Pacific is still there. It's combined with the massive Santa Fe and Central Pacific. And so the Central Pacific coming from Sacramento, workers were hired, thousands of them. And there'd be a few migrants from the eastern part of the United States, but they would hire thousands of Chinese laborers, all men. Some were already there because of the mines, and they were contracted out almost like indentured servants in around Guangzhou, that area, southern China. I'm sorry about my mispronunciation of that. I tried, but it would be in that area of southern China. This is right during the Ming Dynasty, and actually, it was illegal for Chinese peasants to leave China, but they couldn't really enforce it. They're in the middle of this massive rebellion called the Taiping Rebellion. So they came and worked here. This is them trying to kind of tunnel into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Thousands of Chinese workers would die in the haste to try to get through the mountains as quickly as possible. So we're talking peaks as high as 14,000 feet, and they have to tunnel through miles of mountain, of hard rock, pre-dynamite. We're still a year away from dynamite. How do you tunnel through a mountain in 1868? You can use some black powder, but what's the other one?
Hit it with pickaxe.
Yeah, to drill through by hand. Hit, turn it. Actually, you have someone turn it with a sledgehammer. That's tough, dude. Have you ever heard of the legend of John Henry? That's what he did. That's what he did. But back here, and in the winter, they would get snow. They would get 100 to 200 inches of snow on the western peaks of the Sierra Nevadas. So they'd have to work through snow. Miserable work. Coming from the east would be the Union Pacific. And there would be a significant number of immigrants would work there. So many Irish immigrants that it became they were called paddies. Another term for an Irish immigrant. But also a significant number of freedmen from the Civil War would work on the railroad. And many of those freedmen, in fact, most of what today we would call cowboys would be freedmen. The mythology of cowboys that you might be thinking of was purely made up in novels and in Hollywood, folks. They were free, most of them, Montana too. And you can see, look how these ties, look how shabbily they're making. To make money, they put down the rails as quickly as possible. Both the Union Pacific and Central Pacific would have to redo the entire railroad in the 10 years after it was completed because it was so shabbily made. They just were putting out as quick as possible. And at Promontory Point, Utah in 1869, the two railroads met. Promontory Point, Utah. So if you're driving down south to Salt Lake City, get to about very near where Logan is, there is a marker because it's a national park. And so it's just north of the Great Salt Lake. It is in one of the most desolate places I've ever been. It's got these salt flats. It doesn't rain. It is just brown. God, there's just nothing there. They thought a city would form. They tried, but it didn't. But it would be a boom for Salt Lake City. And they connected the line from the Union Pacific down there. And so President Grant ordered them to stop at Promontory Point, and they had a massive ceremony. This is one of the most famous pictures. You've probably all seen that. The picture's back there on my shelf. And the two trains coming together, huge celebration. And I should add, you can see here, if you look carefully, about a half of them are carrying bottles. They were just drunk out of their mind. He's carrying a bottle, I see glasses right there, and this massive celebration. And the thing is, they have telegraphs. So their plan was they would connect the two lines, kind of symbolic, and this would trigger celebrations by telegram. So the plan was this: the last rail, the spikes would be an amalgamated silver and gold spike, a silver spike, a gold spike, and then one last iron spike. So they very carefully tapped in the gold one, silver ones, because that's pretty soft and they're not. Well, they're not there. They immediately took them back out. And then the last iron spike was going to symbolically connect two wires. It made a big deal about having wires connected. That would connect the wires that would open a telegraph line to Sacramento and the east coast of the United States. And then that would trigger a massive celebration. That's the plan. And so Leland Stanford is going to carry the sledgehammer and hit that last spike. The problem was he had been drinking for basically 2 days straight. And they had to kind of like turn him. And he had this thing and he just went and missed by about a yard. So he totally blew it. But the telegraph operator connected the team. And boom, the celebration. And Sacramento, for example, they had a huge celebration. They put out a big banner that said California annexes the United States. That was kind of clever. And now the United States is connected. And that's the Transcontinental Railroad. And it would trigger other transcontinentals. Pretty amazing story. There'd be a really popular painting of this, and they took out all the bottles and replaced it with something else. So like he's holding this a trumpet, and he's holding a laurel wreath. There's bottle, yeah. So there's another painting of Grant at this, and that's supposed to be Leland Stanford, who can hardly see. So who is Leland Stanford? He would be the president of the Central Pacific Railroad. So he would organize this massive operation with this new kind of company called the corporation. He would take the fame of this and the money and buy himself the governor of California. He was a Republican. California was a very Republican state till the 1990s. And he would buy this. And he made his money off government aid. All government aid. But let's be clear about it. There'd be no settlement of the West without the government. There'd be nothing in Montana without the government. Thinking anyone would build a railroad here? There's nothing to make, no money to be made. Would anybody build a road here? If you want to make money from Montana? No, we're all government. We get lots of government aid in Montana. But he would get rich off of this and would become one of the most infamous. They're going to be called robber barons. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I think he felt guilty, a little bit guilty. Not so much, he didn't feel guilty about having the money, but of his reputation of being such a cruel and duplicitous businessman who got rich off government contracts. He didn't really make it himself. So what did he decided what a lot of these robber barons would do. I want to improve my reputation by building a college. Stanford University. See, I'm not so bad, I go to college. So if you go to college, that's the money from this kind of pretty corrupt robbery. Vanderbilt would be the same. There's a lots of colleges like that. A lot. Stanford's one of the most famous. So these are going to be the other transcontinentals, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, Southern Pacific, Northern Pacific, and there's other railroads and money that would be given to railroads. Like this is for the Burlington. We have 4 railroads in the US, 4, we have monopolies now, but not them. So this would also lead to one of the biggest scandals in American political history and showed how business was taking over government. This was during the Grant administration. Now, I mentioned before, Grant administration, you read about all the scandals. Well, we could talk about a lot, but this is the scandal you need to know. And so there's almost always a question on the AP exam, for example, and semester 5, but AP exam about Gilded Age politics, something about them. And if they do, if it's something you have to write, it would be implied about scandals, and this is the scandal they're looking. It's the credit mobilier. It's the most infamous scandal. It's the one you should know. It's not only important, it's a classic example of how business and obviously very wealthy people are going to use government to get rich, but it's important for the test. So Grant did not do this, but it showed his problems of delegating authority. Well, let's get back to the roots of this. This is a pretty common business practice, but it's going to become really common with the age of corporations, meaning through today. Major stockholders, owners of the Union Pacific Railroad, some of the richest men in America, they're going to start a company called the Credit Mobilier, the CM. The CM. The Credit Mobilier will be hired by the Union Pacific to actually build the railroad. They will build the railroad. So they'll be like the contractors. But you notice what's happening. The big owners of the UP bought a company that will be paid by the Union Pacific to build the railroad. Credit Mobilier was the name of a bank in France. And so they're trying to take this name like a stable bank in France, which in reality wasn't all that stable, but that's another story. And then the Credit Mobilier overcharged the Union Pacific by 1,000%, 10 times the amount it paid to make the railroad. So the stockholders of the Union Pacific built the Credit Mobilier, and then this corporation charged 10 times more to the Union Pacific. So basically, they're profiting 2 ways. Because then they went to Washington, D.C., went to Congress, pleading poverty. We can't afford to buy the railroad or to build the railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad is going to fail. We need more money. And they asked Congress for more money, and they would double the subsidy. What an amazing scam. No, they did not invent it, so they're copying others. This scam happens all the time to this day. If you want to see an example of this, go look at every power line in Montana. The old power company called Montana Power created a company to do all that work, and they doubled the pay. Northwestern Energy does the same thing. So, how did Congress pass this? Clear scam. Right. They gave Congress and prominent cabinet members of the Grant administration stock. So here, you're going to get rich. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. What an incredible scam. Kind of amazing. The gall of this. It's all going to blow up. Everyone's going to hear about it. And it's like, oh, God, they caught us being crooked. And everybody did, oh, I didn't mean to do it. But you had almost over half of Congress and almost all of Grant's cabinet accepting stock. And this is going to taint politics for the next 20 years. Ironically, would help business, but it tainted all Congress. James G. Blaine looked like he was going to be president in 1884, but he took stock and was defeated by my uncle. And because of that, this will affect politics from then on. So, my great-great-great-uncle, over Cleveland. Yes, I have an uncle who was president. I know what you're thinking. You just pick Grover Cleveland because he's so cool. If I could pick somebody who would be my, if I could pick a relative who was a president, I would not pick Grover Cleveland. We will get to Grover Cleveland. You know who I pick, right?
No.
Somebody. So moving on. Not on your side of the family. Yeah, on my dad's side. Uncle Grover. I've never been sarcastic. So, no, true story. That's true. That's true. Uncle Grove. Uncle Grove. So back to this. So you can see from this map, all the lines in red are railroad expansion. And, huge expansion, 1860, I've showed that before. 1870, you can see the transcontinental. So after the war ended, they could start building it. But look at 1880s and 1950. Isn't that just remarkable how many miles were built? Now, the United States has decommissioned most of these rail lines, which is actually a real problem for the United States today. And this doesn't have all the lines here. What about this? But it gives you an idea about how many rail lines they built. Rail would make the United States in many ways. And then in the 60s or 50s, 60s, and 70s, we kind of abandoned it. That's a problem. But the first nativist act, not just party, act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, will be signed in 1882. And this was the first law that banned immigration. It wasn't just kind of intimidation or trying efforts to keep people out. This banned most Chinese immigration. Chinese women were not allowed in the US, kind of by practice. There was a very bigoted, racist idea that Chinese women were all coming to be prostitutes. And which is, of course, absolutely not true. And here, the Qing dynasty, so they wore long braid hair. So that was mandated to all men in the Qing dynasty. And this is an incredibly nativist, racist cartoon right before the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it's saying what's going to happen to America. So here's America, Uncle Sam, being swallowed by Irish immigrants and Chinese immigrants. So the real America is now gone. And then what's going to happen? We'll be swallowed up by Chinese. So got to keep Chinese immigrants. And that will be the first anti-immigration law. There'll be a couple more small, narrow laws, and then in 1924, nativism will almost basically ban all immigration, except from Northern Europe. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. So that's Montana. That's the Northern Pacific Railroad. The Northern Pacific Railroad realized we're getting all this government aid. So the heads of the railroad, like Jay Gould, they just decided we're just getting money. We can do anything we want. The federal government's reputation is online. We have to build this railroad. We have to build it. So what did they do? They took all the money from the land grants and loans and paid all the big stockholders of the company huge bonuses and went bankrupt. And what did the United States government do? They had no choice but to give them more money. And then what did they do? Paid themselves more money. The Northern Pacific Railroad went bankrupt. They called it receivership back then 7 times. And that shows what they could do with these government subsidies. Because if the company fails, we look bad. This will not be the first time or the last time this is going to happen. So these are all the railroads. And you might see one other problem. See it? How do you schedule this? How do you schedule trains? You see it? The railroads would create the time zones because of this. The time zones came from the railroad, so you could schedule trains. And everybody just followed. So, Pacific, Mountain, Central, Eastern time zones, railroads. And this would also trigger with us. So American Indians would fight their last stand and would be triggered by the railroads. The miners started it, but this railroad, it split the huge bison herd in half. And when the migratory patterns were all disrupted, the numbers of bison started dropping dramatically. Their normal breeding habits were gone. So the numbers were already dropping. And then the hunters came in. And this actually, things like this did happen. People would bring their rifles onto this is the Union Pacific Railroad across Wyoming. And they would shoot out the windows at any animal they passed by, but especially bison. It's alive, we must kill it. And they would shoot out the window, but especially bison. I'm only slightly being facetious about it's alive. And this would trigger the Plains Indian Wars. So you see this called the Indian Wars. Now remember, there have been constant fighting this whole time. And this is after Tippecanoe and Horseshoe Bend. But these are the last stand. And the United States will be as cruel and as harsh as you can imagine. So, what were the US tactics? Now, we don't see 1860, we just see the elements, but after the Civil War, we really see. First one, divide and conquer. So, just like they would do the English colonists, this is what colonists always do. This is what the Roman Empire did in Gaul, today's France, to conquer that. You pick one tribe against the others. In Montana, this is going to be a really big deal. One of the biggest tribes in eastern Montana were the Crow. And the Crow feared and therefore despised the Lakota Sioux. So what did the United States do? We allied with the Crow, used the Crow to help defeat the Lakota, and then defeated the Crow and forced them on a reservation. That is why today, Crow, it's really ironic, the Crow Reservation and the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, which are allied to the Lakota, are right next to each other. They despise each other. Right next to each other in Montana. So, divide and conquer. Next. Then, once they're weakened, force concentrate them. And what's going to be known as reservations. Remember the Indian Removal Act from 1830? To take that template where they divided up Indian territory, today's Oklahoma, and turn that into reservations. Sometimes the land might be good, sometimes the land might be bad, but the idea would be force them there and open up the rest of the land, take it for the United States. And what about those who refuse to surrender? Total war. Sometimes you see it called economic warfare. So cover the area with forts to restrict their movement, and then take away their main food source. Kill the bison. You kill the bison, not only does it open up area for cultivation, those plains tribes that cannot or will not go to reservations will starve to death and have no choice. And remember, Grant would be at first commander of the army and then president. Sherman would be commander of the army after Grant. And one of the most important generals under Grant would become his cavalry commander in the east. Sheridan would command the area around Montana and the north. All those people learned war in the last year of the Civil War, total war. So they would aid the buffalo hunters, provide protection and even ammunition for the buffalo hunters, protect the railroads, and then the railroads would be a way to get the furs for the buffalo back, and then use the army to punish any attacks on the buffalo hunters. A coordinated attack. And the buffalo hunters will go out. Now, let's be clear, they couldn't save the meat, but they could save the fur. Save the hide, not the fur, the hide. And you know, a team of 3 buffalo hunters, they could kill 1,000 bison in a day. Because if they could shoot the lead bison, because there's no natural predators, they just kind of mill. You just pick them up, bang, bang, bang. And just have mounds of death. And then they would go through and they would, the worst job, you would be the skinner, skin the hide, lay it out to dry, then they would make bales, almost like hay bales, and ship them, get them to the nearest rail yards. This is on the Santa Fe Railroad in Dodge City, Kansas. And ship them there and send them east. And then the meat would just be left to rot. They might cut out the tongue. They really like the tongue they eat. Besides tongue, I've had, just the whole idea is kind of, you know, so I don't like it, but tongue, and that'd be it, and just murder. You combine that with the disruption caused by the railroads and all this killing, the buffalo herds, the numbers begin to go down in the 1860s and then crash by the 1870s. So remember I told you there were 50 to 60 million bison on the plains in 1850? Anybody want to guess how many were left alive by 1890? Born now, about 2000 maybe. That's it. Gone. Just gone. Oh, what did they use the hides for? Okay, they could be used for coats, but they're not very practical. They're not practical for rods. Thick leather. For the belts for the new factories. They would be the belts. They all invest for that. And then you can imagine there'd be thousands of bones on the plains. Because there are millions of bison. There must be bones everywhere. It's impossible to find a bison well, especially from this era. Because in the 1890s, they went and gathered them. This is in Kansas, the gathering of, this is one of the more famous pictures. These are all heads. Took them to the rail yards and sent them east. What do you do with the bones? Grind them for fertilizer. So they ground them all. And so that's what happened to the bison. So it was a combination of being slaughtered, but also just disruption in their migratory patterns led to reproductive rates just plummeting. Same thing's happening to a lot of animals now because of it. So 1864, we just get this really quick. We'll start right here. Sand Creek. So this, I got to pick and choose, right? So I'm picking the most, I think, are the best examples of what happened, and I want to tie Montana, obviously. So 1864, we have these Colorado gold hunters. And they sent out these hunters to get food. And then right into the Cheyenne hunting grounds. Cheyenne, fierce fighters. They had a warrior society called dog soldiers that were fierce fighters, but not disciplined. You know, disciplined forces take advantage of that. But that's going to lead to the war. And so they went out to attack the buffalo hunters. Now they were bringing the meat back to the miners. And so there's a lot of weapons. This is 1864. They're in the middle of the Civil War. So the United States militia is well armed. There were a couple fights at the Civil War in Colorado. The last thing, U.S. militia was sent. Last thing, write this down. We're done. U.S. militia was sent out under Colonel William Shivington. Shivington was a businessman and a drunk, but they went out to go find the Cheyenne. Go find them. Punish them for attacking the buffalo herds. I should add, he could find nobody. They stumbled around. Oh, what time of year did they attack? Winter, when they're hunter death. Tomorrow we'll quick finish this. We'll finish the rest of the Indian Wars, the Homestead Act. I will answer, beginning of class, any question you have from the review list, I will answer in the form of riddles. I will take a couple off. Okay. I'm kind of guessing we're all finished. All right. Don't let me forget. Okay, don't let me forget.
Okay, I didn't hear you.
It's always